So, Anya, it is lovely to see you again. So, tell us, what subjects did you do at sixth form college and what subject are you studying now and where?
So I did French, English literature, and music at Hereford, and now I do music at Merton College, Oxford.
And that sounds like a pretty tough set of A levels. How did they all go?
It was a lot. I won't lie. It was a lot of work over 2 years, and I don't think, especially with something like French, you can't kind of decide halfway through that you will then do the work to kind of pick up the pace. You do have to work consistently hard for the 2 years, but I think they work really well together. And I think they, especially English and music, they inform on each other a lot. I mean, the combinations worked really well for me, so.
That's fantastic. And also, as you said, the kind of historical context. I often think when I'm teaching modernism, I'm thinking, oh, is this, modernism, Schoenberg and all those, the kind of context of music as well at A level is really nice.
Yeah, and I think actually with English you get a really good kind of overview of the kind of social movements, the artistic movements that you're looking at, basically with any humanities subject. So it's a combination that I think I would recommend to do. And a lot of the musicians I know now did English at A level.
Fantastic. That's really helpful. And then when you came to sixth form college, did you always know you were aiming for those kind of top university? Was that your kind of plan? Tell us a little bit about when you arrived at sixth form college. How was it for you?
It was definitely a daunting change in terms of what I was thinking about in terms of university. I knew I wanted to go to university, and that was the route that I was going to take. I wasn't 100% sure with the subject. I did for a while think about doing English, but I think I was about two-thirds of the way through my first year when I really kind of zoned in on Oxbridge. And that, I think, is when most people kind of really firmly decide that they are going to try for Oxbridge, because you do have to think about it over the summer. I made the decision to go for one of the more kind of prestigious, like traditionally academic universities then. But I would encourage people to think about it almost as soon as possible, which sounds really early, and it is to a large extent. But I think the more time you spend thinking about it and kind of turning over in your mind, kind of what's the kind of place you want to go to, what do you want to get out of your university experience, the more time you give yourself to consider those kind of questions, the better decision you will make for yourself.
I absolutely agree. And that's very wise advice. And then when did you start your personal statement? And what did you write in your personal statement, if you remember?
I started my personal statement, or I started thinking about what I wanted to write in my personal statement almost as soon as the summer holidays between my first and second year started. And I kind of had it in my mind that for an Oxbridge humanities personal statement, you had to have read all of these things above and beyond your A-level course. So I kind of read all these things that I thought would make myself sound intelligent and academic and having done all this research. So put that in there. And I did. I also said, I had a little paragraph about how I really liked to read and I really liked English literature. And that my EPQ had been on Shakespeare and his use of song. And I think I was really fixed on this idea of like super curriculars, because I think what they're looking for is somebody who is really ready to take on ideas, turn them over, consider them, be persuaded and also be persuasive. So I think anything that shows that you can take on information and work through it is a really good thing to put in your personal statement. I think one of the best things you can do about your personal statement is just kind of start, because I think it takes ages for people to go, what can I put in there? What can I say about myself? How do I present myself in the best way possible? And actually the first draft is just something you have to get out of the way, and then you can work on it, but you can't do any editing until you have something on the page. So just write it. And it sounds like a really terrible piece of advice, but I think
No, that's great advice. And tell us about interviews.
I had to send in 2 essays and like a musical theory exercise. So they had those, and then I went to interview in December, and I had one at Merton and one at Queen's. And the interview is, I mean, it's such a strange experience. And I think people, because one of the big, when you read all of the kind of admissions advice and all of the resources they give out, the interview is, it's really hard to say something genuinely helpful for someone going to interview. But I think just going back to the idea of being open to ideas. They're not looking for a fully formed academic in the interviews. And I think one of the best things that somebody said to me before I went for interview was, you know, they don't want you to know all the answers. They're not interested in you having something to say all of the time. What they're really looking for is what you can do when you don't know the answer, and how you work through a problem when you're confronted with material that you haven't seen before and you don't really know what to do with, and where do you start. The idea that voicing your thought process is one of the best things you can do in the interview, and it's a really scary thing to do, because I think people always assume that anything other than their final answer is almost, they'll say something really silly, or they'll sound really stupid and they will have ruined their chance. And that definitely will happen in the interview. You will say something and then wish you hadn't said it, and then you'll think about it for the next 4 years that you said this really terrible thing. But it is just about being able to work through difficult concepts, because they will give you something you've never seen before, and something that is completely baffling and very overwhelming, but they want to put you in a position where you're a little bit uncomfortable and you don't really know where to start, and they want to see that you have strategies to negotiate material you haven't seen.
That's really useful. And so did they give you some music, or what did they give you in your interviews?
Everybody had 30 minutes before their actual interview, and they gave us a piece of academic writing. I think mine was Adorno. And then they give you things called blind scores. So they take away the composer and they take away the date, and they just give you the actual music. And I had, I think, some choral stuff, some chamber music, a string quartet. They give you a few things and they'll work through those in the interview. And I think actually what was really striking for my interview, they didn't ask me about my personal statement at all. I think when you go for like practice interviews, people often spend a lot of time kind of working through what you say in your personal statement. But I would say just be mindful that actually some people don't ask you about it at all.
Yeah, fantastic. And that's really helpful as well. I have to admit, a blind score sounds terrifying.
They don't kind of ask you like, do you know who this is? Do you recognize this? They're not kind of that horrible, but they will ask you things like, do you know what this symbol means if it's a very early medieval score, or could you kind of guess who could have written this or what it was for? So they will kind of ask you things around it, but they will never say kind of what, no. who is this composer?
That's really helpful. And then tell us what it's like being at Merton and being at Oxford. What have you enjoyed?
I think for Merton specifically, it's one of the oldest colleges, and now I sound like one of those kind of admissions board people, but it is one of the oldest colleges, and I think what makes it so special of a place is that you live amongst these really old buildings, and it feels like living in Harry Potter for like, it's a terrible comparison, but that is what it feels like, and I think it's quite, and it's Oxford as a place, but also the colleges are so gorgeous. And you kind of, I think you do have to pinch yourself every so often and go, I actually live here for 8 weeks at a time, and I study here, and this is where I kind of make my base. And I think the collegiate system is really good for kind of forging these communities in the student body. And obviously you can you meet people from other colleges in the societies or the choirs, the orchestras, so they're all intercollegiate, but your college is kind of your university community that you spend most of your time in. It fosters this really nice kind of social interaction between lots of different bubbles. So I think you meet different people depending on kind of what you're doing in and outside of college.
That's really nice. Now, if you were to give any hints and tips, so imagine you're back in year 12, what would your hints and tips be?
Read widely, I think, is one of the things that I would say. And read widely in a way that, say you do English or music, that obviously you have to read your course texts, but go and read something that you saw that you thought was really interesting but isn't related to your course, because they want to see, especially at interview, they want to see that you have gone above and beyond what your A-level asks you to do. Pursue interests that aren't in your A-level. Be critical about what you're reading, because I think it's not just about taking on all of this information and getting to interview and regurgitating that you've read this and you saw that and you know all of these kind of extra facts. It's actually reading something and taking time to consider what your response is and whether or not you agree, because what I think is really hard to do and a really kind of difficult thing to adopt, even now, even me having done kind of 2 years of my undergraduate, it feels very wrong to kind of read an academic and go, well, I don't agree, because who are you to not agree, especially when you're kind of 17, 18 and applying, but you are a scholar in and of your, in your own right. So you can, I think what's really, really good to do is that when you read something, think about it, reflect on it critically and go, do I agree? Which bits do I agree with? What do I think was really successful in this text? And kind of use that as the basis for your research, for your kind of pursuit of extra interests.
That's exactly, I completely agree that pursuing an interest is really key. And then what's your favorite thing about your course?
One of the topics we do is called Music, Thought and Scholarship, so MTS, and it's about basically like how we think about music. So it isn't necessarily like about one particular historical period or composer, but it's about the kind of scholarship that informs the way we write about, the way we perform music. And particularly in that, I really enjoy thinking about gender theory in music. And for MTS, you can kind of go in any direction. When you get to higher education, you can read what you like under the umbrella of the topic that you're studying, and you can be more independent in the materials that you're looking at. For me, MTS is my favourite.
That's brilliant. And are you doing lots and lots of singing as well, I assume?
Yeah, so I'm a choral scholar with Merton, so we do 3 even songs a week, and then we get a free dinner afterwards, which is always a win. So yeah, and then we do concerts on top of that. And then in my first year, which was really exciting, we went to Hong Kong and Singapore as our kind of choir tour. So if you are thinking about being a choral scholar, it's really important to kind of think about that early, because what's different from Oxford to Cambridge is that to be a choral scholar for Oxford, you have to apply for that before your academic application. So just be wary of that.
That's really helpful as well. Well, it sounds like you're having a wonderful time, and thank you so much for all your advice. It has been brilliant. Thank you.